Okay, question number 7. What page is it?
52.
Page 52. Lots of 52. There you go. All right, so they said between 0 and 100,000, you pay 35% tax no matter what amount you make in there. Then the next step was from 100,000 to 500,000. What was the tax bracket?
45%.
So they're taxing you 45%. Let's just move this stuff down here. And then above 500,000, what did they say?
55%.
Okay, above 100,000, you're looking at 55% tax. Thanks, Sal. Okay, so what that means is, in terms of a general graph, okay, before we go ahead and graph it, I want to give you the idea. This is a piecewise function specifically because what you're looking at is something that works like this. Okay, actually, no, we can go up. 1, 2, we'll call this 100,000, okay, on the y-axis. Okay, so this is our 100,000. Oh, actually, sorry, let's do this the other way. We're going to put the money on the x-axis and the percent on the y. So we'll call this money. No, I want to do that backwards. Let's do money on the y and percent on the x. Okay, so no, I like the way I had it before. Just because I want to give you a number, I want to give you a flat graph. We'll do money, percent. That's not a percent, it's 30. Okay, so whether we're making, let's say this is 50,000, 2, 3, then here we have 100,000, okay, 1, 2, 3, and then it goes up, 152, 253, 354, 455.
So on.
Yeah, so here's 500,000. Okay, so essentially what's happening here is at these points the brackets are changing, the amount of tax percentages you make. Okay, so we'll call these our breakpoints. From 0 up to 100,000, we're paying 35% in tax. Okay, call that the percentage. So if I have a line, no matter what amount I'm making, it's 35%. Let's do a solid one. No matter what amount I make, it's 35%. Then, as soon as I get above 100,000, my percentage increases to 45%. Okay? So now, if I made 100,000 one year, I'd pay 35%. If the next year I made $100,000, $100,001, okay, I would be taxed 45% on, right up to 500,000. And then same idea. If I made 500,000 the year before, I get 45%. If I made $500,001 the next year, we're looking at, again, a solid 55%. Okay? Those are supposed to be straight lines. But essentially, this is constantly breaking.
Okay.
So we need to make a piecewise function for this. Do you know what you would do in order to get this?
F of x equals...
Okay. So we have our f at x, okay, is equal to, what percentage is it going to be on our y to start?
35.
Yeah. So we're going to be at 35, no matter what, right? And that's if what?
If x is... Is it less than equals to $100,000?
Yeah. Okay. So does that mean if it's at negative 50,000, we still get taxed 35%?
Yes.
Really? So if the, I guess, government owes me money? Sorry, no. If I lose money, I still have to pay the government more? No. What's the cutoff? When x is less than 100,000 and what was our starting point when we made this piecewise function?
$100,000.
That was our endpoint for the first line.
Mm-hmm.
You notice here that's the endpoint. What was our starting point in terms of x?
0.
0, yeah. Because less than that, I'm not paying tax. I don't pay tax if I lose money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So then x is still, it's going to be between $0. So it's 35% if between 0 and $100,000. Okay? I'm not sure if they want the unit signs, like the percentage of dollars. You can put them in, you don't have to. Okay? Then what would be our next one? F at x is,
The earnings are greater than $100,000 up to subtracted. So like, so 45%.
yeah, 45%.
If $100,000 is less than x or equals to
Now, hold on. Okay, no, keep going. Sorry. And,
x is less than to $500,000.
okay. Now, there's one little issue here I want to point out. It says here that it's 35% if equal to 100,000, and it says here it's 45% if equal to 100,000.
Oh, that can't work.
That can't work. Only one of these can possess that spot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Which one is it?
The first one?
The first one. So then how would I write this function here?
Less than.
That's it. I get rid of the equals then. Okay? So it's only if x is greater than 100,000 and less than or equal to 500,000. And finally,
so you only do that is when, the first one. How do you know the first one's going to be like that, though?
how do I know the first one's going to be between 0 and 100,000?
No, if it's like 100,000 is less than x.
Oh, because I've already possessed it. In the question it says the first 100,000. So that's our cut point. So because that's our cut point, that means it's equal to. They're saying the first 100,000. If it was to be less than 100,000, they would have said at $99,000 you would make 35%. But because they included 100, that means we're going to have an equals to. So it's going to be less than. So everything before and right up until $100,000, even if I make $100,000, I'm still at 35%. Now here's where I would kind of make my circle, you know. Then it has to be $100,000 and 1 cent. Then I'm making 45. Or sorry, then I'm being taxed 45%. So in that case, I can't be equal to 100,000. I have to be the next, even if it's a minuscule amount, I have to be the next number up. So in that case, I wouldn't be equal to, x would just be greater than 100,000, so whatever number that is, and then up to 500,000 and including. If I make 500,000, I'm still only taxed 45%. Then the last part of the function.
So at 55%,
Yeah.
if x is less than 500,000, is that it?
Does that look right to you? If x is less than 500,000, I get taxed 55%.
Oh, x is greater than.
There we go. As long as x is greater than. And not equal to, because equal to was the one before. As long as it's greater than 500,000, it's a 55%. And it goes on like that forever.
We did that on the board with my teacher, and she did something different.
Okay, let's take a look what she got. Okay, so the way your teacher set this up in class, same question, number 7. She measured the y-axis in amount you're paying in tax compared to your total income, where we had measured the percentage being paid, which were flat amounts, compared to your income. Okay, so what she wanted to see is the actual amount of money you're going to end up paying. So one way to do this is to get 2 points. We're making a linear equation. If you make $0, okay. If you make $0, so we have to try to create some equations. So we're looking for y equals mx plus b type of an equation. That's what she has here, okay? Now, we know that she's getting taxed 35% depending on income. So y will be amount paid in tax. Amount paid in tax. And x will be your total income, okay? So if your total income is $0, okay, so if x was 0, and we know that the slope was the amount being taxed, so she was being taxed 0.35, which is 35%, they told us that, okay, x, and then we're kind of trying to find our b at this point. If we're being taxed $0, so 0.35 times 0 equals y plus b, okay, we know that's going to end up at 0. Am I actually going to be paying any amount in tax? No, I'm not going to pay any amount in tax if I'm making $0. So we also know our y is going to be equal to 0 in that instance. So since y will be 0 and our x equates to 0, our y-intercept, I'm going to bring the 0 over, is still 0. Does that idea make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what that means is when we go to start our graph is going to start at 0. Okay, now the next thing what we got to figure out, now that we know that our y equals mx plus b is really just y equals 0.35 times x. Our b is 0. We don't have to include it. So this is our equation to start. Next we got to figure out how much am I going to pay in tax if my total income is 100,000. That's our max point. Okay, so I would substitute 100,000 in for my x. Okay, and in that case I'm going to end up with, so I'm going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that's a lot. I'm paying $35,000 in tax. Okay?
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of tax. It's a high tax bracket. That would be the max if I'm making 100,000. So I'm going to create my y graph here. It's going to go up to, shoot, what is it going to go up to? I just want to make this. Okay, so we've done our amount paid in tax. This is in thousands of dollars also. We're going to have to, in the thousands of dollars. Okay? So if I get up to this point of 50,000, 100,000, 150,000, 250, 350. So at $100,000, I'm at, what did we say again? 35,000. Okay, a little tough to graph on what we got here, but let's say it's roughly a little higher than halfway up. Okay, so at 100,000, we're there. So we have a graph that is increasing to that point. Okay, so starting to increase to that point, and we know that's going to be one of our cutoffs. We established that a while ago. Okay, now our next tax bracket, the amount we're going to be taxed, we discovered, it's going to be very similar to this function, right? We know it's going to be y is equal to what? 0. Do what we'll multiply by x? 35 was the first tax bracket. What's the second tax bracket?
45.
45. So 0.45 will be our new tax bracket.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, technically, we have to figure out where this starts. So at $101,000, right? So y equals 0.45. We're going to do our thing in dollars. So say we pay $101,000. We have to figure out what our tax amount is going to be up to this point. Okay? So our tax amount up to this point, well, hold on, let's establish this. Technically, normally what happens with tax amounts in taxing systems is the first, even if you break into this tax bracket here, so say here's our other cutoff, with tax systems, normally on your first 100,000, you still are only taxed 35%. It's only on every dollar after that. So they don't all of a sudden go back and go, oh, you make more than 100,000? Okay, now we tax everything 45%, because it would actually make more sense in those cases to make $100,000 than 110, because in the amount you pay tax, you actually make less money. So let's assume that's the case, that they tax your first 100,000 at 35%, and then the next dollar gets the 45%. Okay, so in that case, we know we're going to be starting at the same point we were at. Okay, because we know we're going to get there. This point right here, we're going to start at that point. We're going to find out our new maximum, what our 500,000 would be. So our 500,000, so instead of 101,000, let's put in 500,000. Okay, 500,000, 0.45 times 500,000, $225,000. Okay, so at 500,000, we're going to be at $225,000, which is probably about here. Okay? So if you notice, the line has gotten steeper. Okay? I'd like to done that solid. We got a steeper line, which is good because that's the part that's going to be 45%. And then finally, our last one, I'm not going to quite measure it, but it becomes even steeper. We're looking at 55% tax bracket. So this piecewise function, because she's done amount paid in tax, is actually linear. So the only real difference between the one we had before is instead of using the 0.35, our 35%, her f at x, because it's measured a little differently, is 0.35x. That's the linear equation. That's why it's a straight line. If between 100,000. Now, so the next bracket should be 0.45x minus 100,000 if 0 is greater than, that's 100,000. If x is greater than 100,000, and less than or equal to 500,000. And finally, I'll give you this one too. 0.55 x minus, what is she? It should be 500,000 if x is greater than 500,000. And the reason it's like that is because, remember what I said before? Your tax bracket is going to break. And the first 100,000, we're only getting taxed at 0.35%. Okay, so we should only be taxed at 0.35%. So your amount the amount you're being taxed should actually be 45, and this is the amount. We minus it 100,000 from that, and then we technically need to add 0.35 times your exit times the 100,000, so that amount there. So we can actually find out a new.
Ooh, that's how she got it.
So the way she got her number is after 100,000, so x minus 100,000, we're paying 45%. But because our first 100,000 has to be taxed 35%, she distributes. We get 35,000. I distribute the 0.45 into here. I get 0.45x minus 45,000. And then I combine my like terms, negative 45,000 plus 35,000. I get 0.45x minus 10,000. So the brackets kind of drop off. We get minus 10,000. And let's make our third equation the exact same style, okay? Same idea, 0.55, 500,000. Actually, move this a little bit. It's a little big. So I want you to just look at what I've done, even though it's really squished. 0.55%, depending on what you make, minus 500,000, plus the 45% tax bracket with 500,000 minus 100,000. Because that first 100,000, we're paying 35% on. And then plus 0.35 times 100,000. Okay? So let's start to equate this. I distribute the first one, I get 0.55x minus 500,000 times 55. So we get 500,000 times 0.55, $275,000. $75,000. Plus, this actually becomes 0.45 times $400,000, right? Because we're only paying 45% on the $400,000 above 100,000. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, and 35 times 100,000 is 35,000. Okay, 0.55x minus 275 plus 45 times 400,000. 0.45 times 400,000 is 180,000. plus 35,000. And then finally, we get 275,000 negative plus 180,000 plus 35,000. And boom, minus 60,000. So your last equation is 0.55x minus $60,000. And the reason the equation is set up that way is because before those points, we're not getting those same tax brackets. So the equation changes. Okay, we always start at a new point. Oops, sorry. Let's see the other function here. We always start at a new point. See how it constantly increases? So we start at the last point and go up. It's not like we jump to a new number. That would be ridiculous. I wouldn't make that extra $1. I would just prefer to not make it. I tell them not to pay me as much.
So basically, it's just using the formula and plugging it in.
Yeah, exactly. So whatever formula it is, they've given you the point, what, 2,1?
Mm-hmm.
They've given you the point 2,1. Say we're having an f at x where the very first one, a is negative.
So it's like negative.
So they have this function minus x. K, x is negative and 2. So what we have is a is negative 1.
Mm-hmm.
B is negative 1. And k was 2. There's no h. Okay? Mm-hmm. So I just have to plug it into here. We already knew x was 2. So the number 2, there is no... Oh, sorry, b is negative 1. Mm-hmm. So we divide by negative 1. And there is no h. So we, add by 0, which will do nothing. A is negative 1. Our y value was 1. Okay? Mm-hmm. And our k is 2. So to figure out our function now...
Negative 2.
Negative 2, yeah. And then this is negative 1 plus 2, which is...
1. Oh, okay.
Okay. Does that make sense?